Medical, legal, and ethical issues. So, like I was saying earlier, I can't just drive along in my personal vehicle, come up to someone who's laying on the ground, and then start sticking needles in them, giving them fluid, putting oxygen on them, giving them medications, things like that, kidnapping them, taking them in my car to the hospital. While I might have their best interest in mind, that's not legal, okay? We have professionals to do that for us. The things that we get in trouble for in this field are negligence, consent, and kidnapping, and AMAs. So the legal system is composed of 5 types of law. There's legislative law. I'm just a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Maybe you guys remember that from back in the day. Administrative law. Governmental agencies to protect details about the process of law, certifications, for example. Then common law. I know he said there's 5 types of law, but this is the one that's theoretically going to, not common law, but tort law. Common law is judge-made law, societal acceptance over a period of time made into law by local judges. Criminal law, felonies, state, local, federal courts prosecute an individual for violation like traffic accidents. And then finally, civil law, also known as tort law. This is when one person sues another person over damages, over breach of contract, over whatever. This is what most court cases in the United States are because we are a very litigious society. This is also where a lot of EMS negligence cases will fall under. Unless you're charged with a criminal offense, like, I don't know, assaulting someone, you will probably be calling a court over civil law. They're suing you because you didn't provide good care to them. Now, some people are protected. If you work for a fire department, you're technically a federal employee, meaning you're protected by something called sovereign immunity. This means that I cannot sue the government, and you, working for the government, are an agent of the government, so therefore you cannot be sued directly either. The department can be sued. So that's why it'll be like, the Department of Transportation or whatever the EMS branch falls under, or they can sue the fire department, but you can't sue the government itself, which is a strange kind of way of wording it, but what are you going to do? Certification and licensure. There's just different ways we have to describe how your certifications are granted. Okay. Consent and refusal of consent. So for consent to be given, the patient has to be legal age, they have to be unimpaired, and they have to be given the information first. They have to be lucid and competent. Doesn't always happen though, right? Because we have patients that are unconscious. We can take them via something called implied consent, meaning that if they were conscious or if they were able to answer our questions and we asked them, do you want help? They would say yes, because realistically, anybody who's unconscious would appreciate a hand. Now, whether or not that's actually true does not matter, right? Doesn't matter that once they wake up, they're pissed at you and they're demanding you let them out. We have to assume that if they were competent, they would say they need help. And we'll be protected by that, as long as it's in the report that way. False imprisonment, assault, battery, kidnapping. Again, like I said, I can't just pick someone up and put them in my car, but if I have a medical license and a medical director allowing me to perform these things under implied consent, then yes, I can take someone and I can put them on an ambulance, even if they say they don't want to be there. I can get them under a number of things. I can even put them on an involuntary hold. This means that they don't want to go to the hospital, but I think it's in their best interest if they at least go in for an assessment. Now, here's how this works out. I can call, it's here in California, we call it a 5150. You might call it something different depending on where you work. But you can take someone in against their consent. A lot of people believe that if that happens, you'll be in the hospital for 3 days. That's not true. Here's what happens. You take someone in and it's called a 5150. That means that I'm taking you in against your will for an assessment by a medical professional. Then a separate medical professional can perform a 5151, which is an involuntary assessment of the patient, including and up to blood work if that's deemed necessary. finally, they can form a 5152, which can put up to a 3-day mandatory hold if they believe the patient is suicidal or not in their right mind or something else is going on. Okay, so this is a lot of different steps and has to be made by different medical professionals, because we can't just have one person, especially if it's just a paramedic, being judge, jury, and executioner on someone's right to live their life for the next 3 days. All right, so there's a couple people involved in this process, and it just helps to know the actual legalities of that. And finally, there's abandonment. If you stop caring for your patient, walk away from your patient, even for just a short period of time, that can be considered abandonment. This normally happens when we just turn over patients at the hospital without a nurse signature. You abandon your patient. You can get in trouble for that. They always need to be under at least the same level of care or higher. All right, an EMS paramedic may transfer care to an EMT or other BLS provider if the patient has been assessed. We call this a BLS downgrade here in San Diego. No patient should ever be turned over to a lower care provider with any advanced procedure initiated, like an IV, airway, or if a 12 lead has been placed. Like I've done a lot of 3 leads. I've even done 12 leads, and then it's benign, and then we transport them via BLS. That's fine. It depends on your local protocols. I wouldn't turn over a chest pain patient, just to clarify. But if we had a syncopal episode and I did a 12 lead just to verify, and then we get back a normal heart rate, but they still want to go to the hospital, I might turn that one over to BLS if I believe it's just like a benign issue or just something going on, orthostatics or something like that. It's rare because most of those I take pretty seriously, but you guys know what I'm talking about. There's some where you get on scene, you're like, yeah, this is not realistically that. Finally, confidentiality. Now, patients are protected, and a lot of information is protected. I can't tell you, hey, I ran a call on George Smith at 321 Hawthorne Avenue, and he smokes meth, because obviously that's an invasion of a patient's privacy as someone privy to that information when the average person would not be. But I can tell you, I ran a call, meth overdose, 61 male, downtown San Diego. That's okay. I can tell you all that information. What they might have issue with is me saying downtown San Diego. In fact, I got in trouble. I posted something on my Instagram about a seat or something about, by the way, what I posted was photos of the EKG, because I had a really cool torsades case. And I posted that it was in a McDonald's, and my company came after me, and they tried to get me in a lot of trouble, saying that I had broken HIPAA by saying McDonald's, and that was too specific of a location. And I asked, can I change it to a restaurant? And they said, that's maybe too specific too. So I said, can I say downtown San Diego? And they're like, well, we prefer if you just said San Diego, but downtown's okay. So there you go. Now there's 3 McDonald's in downtown San Diego, and there's tons of meth users in San Diego. So that realistically is not a real concern, but it can be. In fact, when they were doing the investigation, they pulled all of my Facebook entries that I'd ever posted. And they found one when I was an EMT years back where I said that I helped deliver a baby in an elevator, which is a true story. And they were trying to decide if me saying elevator was too specific of a location. And they ended up deciding it was not. But that's just the kind of levels that these companies will go to protect a patient's information. So learn from my mistakes, you guys. Now, one thing that's not protected is infectious diseases. The patient has HIV, AIDS, Hep C or B, or any number of sexually transmitted diseases. Those are not protected. Now, I can't just go ask, hey, I need a list of everyone with herpes in San Diego County, and they're not going to give that to me. What I can say is, hey, I transported this patient on this date, and I'm a care provider, and I have a reason to pull a cert because either there was potential exposure. Then we can only get the infectious disease information from that patient. But again, remember that most stuff is protected. So name, employer, address, relatives' names, dates, phone numbers, finger, voice prints, obviously photographs. A lot of this should make sense. The ones that are surprising are perhaps the address, dates. Now, in a court case, they're going to need 4 things to prove. First, they need to prove that there was injury. Well, they called 911, so the chance that there's injury is going to be high. Then they need to prove that you had a duty to act. If you clocked in to work that day, yes, you had a duty to act. They got you on 2 of them. Breach of duty. They said you didn't do what you were supposed to. They might be able to prove that. Okay, that's 3 out of 4. What's the last one? Damage. I'm sorry, that's the 3rd one. They need to prove that the damage, that there was damage. Sorry, so that's it. So we have the duty to act, breach of duty, damage was done. So again, yes, something happened. Let's say they had a heart attack and you didn't recognize it. Now they're suing you over it. Finally, they have to prove proximate cause, which means that you have to prove that the act was under the control of the paramedic or that the paramedic caused the injury. Realistically, this is the most difficult one for them to prove, because no, I did not make you have a heart attack. I might have missed the fact that you were having a heart attack because of incompetence, but you cannot blame me for you having a heart attack. I'm not the one that caused you to have a heart attack. I can get in trouble for failing to recognize it, because they could say that a competent paramedic would have been able to recognize the signs and symptoms, but it also depends on what my EPCR looks like when they get pulled back. Because if I say in the thing that I asked the patient if he had chest pain, he said no, and then later he said, no, I was having a heart attack, I'm not necessarily liable to know that information. Now, should I have probably caught it? Yes. But again, that's not what needs to be proved here. DNRs, power of attorneys. This can complicate things a little bit. I've seen a lot of DNRs in my career, and very few of them were actually filled out correctly, or were still active, or didn't have some problem with them, or could be easily obtained quickly. The ones when it's really obvious are really when you don't need it. And finally, organ donors. What's your role in organ donors? Not a whole lot. It's realistically, you shouldn't take a dead body to a hospital just because you think it could be an organ donor. That's not realistically our concerns. It should be, but it's going to tie up the hospital pretty considerably, and it's also going to tie us up pretty considerably. So it's not always in best interest. Not everybody's organs can be harvested. Okay, just because someone young died doesn't mean we can use any of their organs, right? There are very strict protocols for the organs we can and cannot use. And as you guys are going to learn later, the chance for successful organ transplants is still pretty low anyways, even with all our modern technology. Keep in mind, if you're on a crime scene, a shooting, stabbing, rape, domestic violence, anything like that, we need to try to preserve the evidence. I know that for any traumatic accident, like shootings or stabbings especially, we want to cut the shirt off right away. Maybe just consider pulling the shirt off instead. Just consider it, because we need to try to keep everything in place and as undamaged as possible. Throw it in a bag, throw it in a box, whatever you need to do. Keep that as intact as you can. And finally, special reporting. So we are mandatory reporters. So if we see child or elder abuse or domestic violence or anything like that, we are required to report it, just like a teacher would. Kind of sad thing that's come about because of this COVID situation is that the number of reported child abuse cases has gone down, which at first glance sounds like it's a good thing. But then you need to remember that the kids aren't in school and the teachers aren't seeing them. And the teachers are the mandatory reporters, and most child abuse reports come from teachers. When kids aren't in school, teachers aren't around them, they're not getting reported. That's why we've had a drop in the reports of child abuse cases. Unfortunately, we have probably not had a drop in actual child abuse cases. Medical, legal, and ethical issues. I'm sure you guys have faced many situations where you've had to deal with strange ethics that nobody else has really ever had to deal with before. It's happened to me. I don't want to tell too many war stories, but I think that this one is important for our talk about ethics. I had a call. It was a suicide on Mother's Day. Someone took pills on a 60-year-old woman, and she was discovered by her daughter. And I got on scene, and the daughter was sitting outside crying. I had my EMT patient sit with her. I mean, the call had come in as like, it's beyond all hope, not breathing, like looks like dead, no CPR initiated. We got there 7 minutes later. We both walk in there. I see the dead body immediately, and I recognize that this is going to be a futile case. We're not going to get her back. So I send my female partner out to go talk with the woman outside, and I'm in there with the patient alone. And I'm going through my thing. Obviously, I go up to the patient. I check them. They're dead. I put the EKG on him to get the asystole strip. No problem. I see the pill bottle by the bed. Okay, grab it up, look at it. I don't even remember what it was. Benzos or something. Benzos and wine, the death combo. And then I start looking around for the suicide note. And I find it. And I've been working in this field long enough to know that there's really no reason to read suicide notes. When I first started, I would read suicide notes because I was very morbidly curious about them. If you've read a suicide note, you'll know that they're not what you'd expect. I probably, when I was younger, I maybe romanticized the idea of suicide because I always thought that I would like write it on a really nice piece of paper with my nicest pen and make it very beautiful and like good handwriting. But realistically, when someone's suicidal, they just don't care anymore. They have lost any semblance of caring about anything, and they'll just pull a piece of trash out of the newspaper, jot down a couple words on the back of it, and then just end it all. And most suicide notes I've seen have been kind of like that, just kind of on a crumpled piece of trash paper. This was no different. It was kind of a crumpled piece of paper sitting there. I didn't read it. I was sitting there and I was going about my stuff, and then I glanced at it and I saw something that was like mean, like it was like swear words. And I was like, well, that's weird. So I started reading it, and it was the meanest suicide note I've ever read. It was blaming the daughter, saying, I never loved you. I never wanted you. You're the reason I wanted to kill myself. You're the reason I have killed myself now. I hope it was just mean. It was just the meanest thing I could have imagined anyone writing to someone. Right at that moment, when I finished reading it, the cop walks in, and the cop says, hey, did you find a suicide note? And I'm sitting there with the suicide note in my hand, and I have to make a decision. Do I give the cop the suicide note and then he's going to give it to the daughter? Or does that suicide note just kind of disappear? And there was no suicide note. I don't know if I made the right decision, but I slid that suicide note into my pocket and I did not give it to anybody. I threw it out in a dumpster later that day. Was that the right decision? I don't know. Ultimately, it wasn't my decision to make. And I think I made the wrong decision by doing that. But I had to make a very quick I had to make a very quick moral call. And I had to decide right then and there what would be right. And I decided for the patient. Whether that's the right call or not is up for debate. But realistically, that's what happened. So we're going to run into issues like this all the time in our field. Is it right? Is it wrong? It's hard to say because most situations we run into are completely dynamic. No one's ever faced them before. The best thing you can do, and this goes against what I just told you, but the best thing you can do is just be completely open and honest with your patients and with their families, because that's the best way to go forward. This is why we have to do things like if a patient dies on scene and their family's there and they're freaking out, we can't say things like they've passed on or they're no longer with us, because people are going to interpret that any way they want to when their mind is racing and they're not thinking clearly. You need to remember that most people don't know anything about medicine. Really, they don't know anything about medicine. And it's hard for us to forget that sometimes. So you need to be very direct. I'm sorry, but Marjorie's dead. There's nothing more we can do for her here. Like I've had to have that talk with quite a few people, and they've done a lot of research on how people deal with stress. Obviously, you know about the 5 stages of grief. I'm sure you're familiar with that. But realistically, they talk about patients that have died on scene. And when the paramedic unit transports them to the hospital and they get called at the hospital versus when the paramedic units call them on scene, which is more beneficial to the family remaining with the patient? And realistically, it's calling them on scene, because when the patient dies on scene, the family gets to deal with this situation in the comfort of their own home, and they are able to start processing that information sooner, rather than if you transport them, then there's this glimmer of hope, and then they're following you to the hospital, they're calling people, and then they're needing to call again and deal with this stuff at the hospital. So people have better responses when they're dealing with this other stuff. So let's go over a couple ethical dilemmas we might run into here. So number one, at the scene of a shooting, you're allowed to go only to the front door of the residence where you can see a male patient lying on the foot of the stairs. He's lying in an expanding pool of blood. He appears to be unconscious, and you note agonal breathing. The police officer refuses to allow you to enter. You state you can see him breathing, and the officer replies, yeah, but he won't be for long, and orders you and your team to leave. How would you handle this situation? There are no right or wrong answers here, but realistically, how would we handle a situation like this? So the first question is, who's in charge of this scene? Yeah, law enforcement's in charge of the scene if they're on scene. So is the cop right to let you in? Is the cop wrong? Realistically, we don't know. So how do we decide? Well, the cop might know something that we don't. The cop might know that there might be another person in the area. There might be another shooter. There might be something else going on. We don't know. Now, our priority is to help the patient that we can see. So we would like to understand why the cop doesn't want us to come in there. So probably interacting with him more might help. And if we can't get through to him, we need to get on the radio with medical control and advise him of the situation. Realistically, the cop is in charge of this scene, though. He might not be a medical authority, but he is the one who is there for our protection. And there might be something else going on that we don't understand about. So the best way we could do this would be by interacting with the cop. Now, I've never had an interaction like this with a police officer with someone who was dying. I literally have shown up on scene where cops have shot someone in the head and their brain matter is on the ground, and the cops are still around this person trying to do CPR. So they are not generally like this, but everyone can be anyway. Number two, you're at the scene of a cardiac arrest and find an elderly female patient rocking the still warm body of her emaciated elderly husband who is dying of cancer. She begs you not to do anything, that she is finally at peace, although she does not have a DNR order. How would you handle this situation? Stage 4 cancer patient, still warm. I guess the first question we need to talk about here is, how many patients do we have? Yeah, we've got 2 patients. Family wishes are important. But again, family wishes aren't everything, okay? He might not be dead. We're not just going to take her word for it. We need to assess him. He might be just having problems breathing. We might say, okay, listen, can we make him comfortable while this is going on, right? Maybe he just needs some oxygen. Maybe he just needs something like that. He might be that he's dead and he's pulseless. If there's not a DNR, when in doubt, we need to work it, okay? Now, obviously, every situation needs to be handled independently, right? So it's hard to say exactly you should always do this or always do that. But when in doubt, we need to work the CPR, but get on medical control radio. Does she have power of attorney over her husband? Does he have a DNR? She doesn't seem like that we have any of these things. We can't just not work someone because someone says, please don't work him, right? That's not how medicine works, all right? If they're doing CPR in the ER and then someone walks in and says, hey, I'm related to him, stop, please. They're not going to stop, right? They need proof. So we're in a little bit different, but we need to be talking with them. We need to separate them. We need to do an assessment on this guy before we do anything else. Push this uphill and get other people involved. Yeah. And what I would really say is separate the patients. We need to separate her, separate him. We need to assess him. We need to see, is he really dead? Is he in CPR status? Or is he just like very, very sick? Number 3, you're at scene of an accidental shooting. The patient is your 22-year-old partner, oh great, who accidentally discharged a small caliber handgun while cleaning it. He has a through and through GSW to his calf with minimal bleeding. He refuses transport and begs you not to report it so that his privacy is protected and he won't lose his job. What do you do in this situation? So he's refusing transport. Do you have to transport him? No, we don't have to transport him. He can AMA. Do we have to report it? I mean, do we have to report a GSW? What did I say, guys? We're mandatory reporters. Do you think GSWs count? Yes. GSWs, child abuse, elder abuse, animal bites, all of these mandatory reportings, especially accidental discharges. Okay. Now, just because the cops show up and file a report for an accidental discharge does not mean that his privacy is going to be infringed. Okay. He can't necessarily lose his job because it's protected by HIPAA, unless there's something else going on. Now, obviously, he's going to have to inform his job that he's got, he has an injury to his leg and he needs to go on light duty or something. But partner's wishes are great. You don't have to transport him. You do have to report it. Because if you don't report it, your cert's on the line. And there's nobody that I'm willing to risk my cert for, other than like if my grandma or mom was sick, maybe I would risk my cert to help them if I knew it would work. But realistically, I'm not going to risk my cert over this nonsense. He should not necessarily lose his job over this. And if he does, that's not your responsibility either, unfortunately. Number 4, your partner contacts a former patient to ask for a date. He got her phone number from the patient care report that you prepared on an emergency call. How do you guys handle this one? Nathan, same answer, partner's wishes. You buy him a pack of Trojan Extra Snugs and wish him the best of luck. How do we handle this? I think this one should be pretty obvious. You've seen this? Oh, goodness gracious. Yeah, and he was fired, as well he should have been. This is not, it was a 5150. Well, hey, I mean, there's something to be said. Something to be said about those crazies. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the wrong way to affect this. This one should be pretty obvious here, but he needs to report it. And if he doesn't, you need to report it if you find out. All right, for one, I can say that I've transported 0 attractive patients in my career. Now maybe that's not entirely true, but like I can count on one hand the number of attractive patients I've transported. Realistically, most people that we're transporting are overweight elders. Oh, everyone's beautiful in Sacramento. Well, Nathan, unfortunately, down in San Diego, there's no good-looking people. This is just the home of the uglies. No, I'm kidding. But realistically, young, fit, in shape people are not the ones getting injured. I had a chance to transport a really attractive patient once in my career. It was, I was working near the University of Arizona, and we got called to the football field for a female with a leg injury. I get there, and the cheerleaders are practicing. Oh man, you better believe I was getting hopeful. I thought, all right, this is the story we're going to tell our grandkids about how we met. And so the security guard gets me all our gear, and he leads us up to the cheerleaders, and then past the cheerleaders to a homeless woman that had wandered onto the field with a big old abscess in her leg. It was disgusting. It smelled so strong. So we've been married for 2 years now. We're very happy. The abscess is getting a little bit better, but that's where we are now. No, realistically, that's the closest I've ever come. Number 5, you're dispatched for a sick baby. Find a 4-month-old baby who is obviously dead. Mom is screaming, help her. Your partner starts CPR even though this is clearly futile. Is that an ethical decision? How do you feel about it? Do you think your partner made the right call? I know my answer. What do you guys think? Should you start CPR on a futile dead baby? Absolutely. Absolutely. We don't necessarily have to. If we show up, well, the way it works in San Diego is I have to contact medical control and get a physician order to terminate resuscitation for any pediatric death, including blunt traumatic arrest, cardiac arrest, anything. So I would get on the phone with medical control and let them know. But we do not necessarily have to start the CPR. It depends on your local jurisdictions. It also depends, like I say, on what's going on with this. BLS is probably a good idea. It's probably a good idea to just do some CPR while you're getting started. All right. unless the presentation to the family is that they know it's futile and they understand that. In that case, you can work with them, right? They're your patients. And if they already understand it, them seeing you perform CPR might not be helpful, right? So it's always going to be reading the situation. Unfortunately, I've been on these calls before. I've been on 2 SIDS calls. One where the parent was screaming, help us, do whatever you can. And the other one where the parents, they knew. And both of those situations were handled very differently. Same result both times, but different situations. You had to do this for a couple soldiers who lost their buddy. I was about to zip up the body bag, caught their look like I was going to give up on their buddy. So yeah, it's Phil. Unfortunately, that's what we're talking about here. Is it's about reading the situation. Yeah, they don't want you to give up, and some people are going to be like that, and other people are going to they know, right? And so it's going to be tough. You ran the full code for traumatic arrest, and that's the right thing to do, right? Absolutely, it's the right thing to do given the situation. It's hard to cut and dry say like you should always do it here and you should never do it there, because this job doesn't work that way. It doesn't. Okay, no 2 people are ever going to present the same way, and no 2 families are going to present the same way. We always need to read the situation. All right, number 6. You respond to a sick party call, find an elderly patient in full arrest. You note a valid DNR taped to the wall above the patient's bed. The family is begging you to help him do something. What do you do in this situation? So this is kind of the opposite one. There is a DNR and they still want you to help. What do you do in this case? Do you start working him? His DNR says one thing. Family's saying another. It's hard to say. This is be a difficult case. I've had this before. Thankfully, when I ran this call, we weren't alone. I was in the ambulance with my partner, and then the fire engine showed up with one of the best captains I've ever had the good fortune of working with. One of the best fire captains. And the same thing. Literally, a DNR was right there on the fridge. The family saying, please, 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 please. Captain said, listen, there's nothing we can do for this patient at this time. It's his wish that he dies peacefully. If you want, we can provide him comfort measures so he can die more comfortably. But it was his wishes that he dies peacefully without any of this interventions. And you need to respect that. He said it in a better way than I'm able to repeat it right now. And he was able to calm the family down. But essentially, that's what he did. I've also been on scenes where they still want us to work it, and we'll work it. Okay. If we know it's going to be futile, we can do it. We can do a basic compressions, put the BVM on, give them some supplemental oxygen, maybe even drill an IO, give a round of epi, call it, get an asystole strip, get on the radio, try to get it called. In San Diego, we have to work them for 20 minutes before we can call it, unless we call into the hospital, explain the situation, what's going on, and then we can call it before then. Explain to the patient. What's helped me is if I explain to the patient, like if they're wondering why I'm calling them on scene, I'll explain to them this. I'll say, we can take them into the hospital, but they're not really going to be able to do anything more than we've already been doing for them. If we haven't had any response by this point, we're not going to get any response at the hospital. And if we do, we're never going to get, your husband or your son or your daughter or your mother back, right? They're never going to come back because their brain is no longer functioning. Pit crew CPR in San Diego. I'm not familiar with what you mean by pit crew CPR. Just kind of like, you mean just like, what do you mean by that? I'm not familiar with that one. Yeah, I mean, we all have roles. I think everyone just kind of falls into it, like the EMTs jump on the chest, jump on the BVM, medics jump on the IO, jump on the pads. Like that's the things. I've got 4. I don't know how you guys approach CPRs, but I approach them and I've got 4 things I'm looking to get. I need someone on the chest. I need someone on the airway. I need access, and I need electricity. Yeah, I mean, I think I know what you're talking about, but everyone just kind of falls into it. And then we just kind of switch as we need to. There's not like designated roles. Me and my partner will always talk about that going into it, right? Like if we got on scene and it's a CPR and it's just the two of us, how are we going to handle that? And realistically, they're going to jump on the chest. I'm going to throw a non-rebreather on at 15 liters, and then I'm going to get the pads on, then I'm going to drill an IO. That's the idea behind pit crew. So it sounds like we're doing the same thing, but it would probably be a good thing to implement. But no, I've never heard specifically the pit crew mentality. All right, number 7. Your patient is extremely critical with a non-secure airway. Medical tells you to divert because they have no ICU beds. You repeat the urgency request, get no answer. You elect to override the physician's order and transport to that facility because the next hospital is 15 minutes away. Can you justify disobeying this direct order? He tells you to divert, but it would take you 15 more minutes. And here's the most important part here. Non-secure airway. That gives it away right there. Absolutely, you're justified to disobey that order and get him to the closest hospital. It doesn't matter that there's no ICU beds. That's not the concern here. The concern is that non-secure airway in 15 minutes. That's going to cause a lot more damage than the fact there's no ICU beds, because we have interfacility transports if he needs an ICU bed afterwards, and he probably will. And he's going to need a second ambulance transport, but you know what? He's going to be able to have a second ambulance transport because he'll still be alive. Absolutely justifiable. Numero 8. You and your partner arrive on scene of a motor vehicle accident. Patient's 16-year-old male complaining of left-sided chest pain. He is self-splinting his left chest. His vehicle was struck at a moderate rate of speed on the passenger side, 18 inches of intrusion. He's refusing treatment. Partner is a primary medic. Patient's mother arrives on the scene, asks your partner if he thinks the young man should go to the hospital. While you're checking the inside of the vehicle, you hear the partner say, "It's your decision, lady. I'm not a doctor." And he's holding out the AMA to sign. What do you do in this situation? Do you think he's making the right call? Should be fairly simplistic. But why is he not making the right call here? What's the issue going on? I mean, I know we're dealing with a minor patient, but there's a family on scene. Yeah, so yeah, there could be a tension pneumothorax. Kids can handle shock well. Now, a 16-year-old is not really a pediatric, let's be honest. A 16-year-old is an adult patient. But I've had patients with tension pneumothoraxes that are doing just fine. They're walking around. They're anxious. They're in really crappy moods. They're self-splinting. They're breathing weird. They're acting weird. But other than that, they're fine. I remember we had to make a decision. Are we going to needle T this patient? And he's like conscious, looking at us, telling us, "Do not stick that needle in my chest." But he's got unilateral lung sounds. His BP's 90 over something. And he's complaining of a little bit of shortness of breath. But he's managing. And we're pulling into the hospital right now. The fire medic with me is like, "Let me stab his chest, please." I'm sitting there thinking, I don't think that's the right call. We're here at the hospital. Let's do it. He didn't earn the darts. Exactly. My theory is if he's able to talk to me and answer my questions, he hasn't earned his dart yet. I've darted patients. It's fun. It's fun. It feels cool. It's also scary as hell the first time you do it. You need to make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. That fire medic was pissed at me forever after that. He always claims that I kept him from doing a needle T and I hurt the patient. Yeah, I didn't hurt the patient. The patient got into the trauma bay. They did a chest tube on him and he's fine. I don't think we made the wrong call there, but I understand it. It would have been his first needle T, so he was really upset about it, and I get that. But it was not my first needle T, and my gut was telling me not to do it. So now that is one issue that we don't really talk about here, but how about this? You show up on scene and your patient tells you that, or I'm sorry, you're a medic and the other medic you're working with has been on the job 20 years longer than you. He tells you, "No, we should do this." And you're thinking, that's not the right answer. When I was young, early in this field, I remember thinking, wow, this guy's been doing this job longer than me. He must know something I don't know. And then later on, when it ended up being the wrong decision, I said, why didn't I not trust myself? And I hope that's the more message you guys take away from this too, is you should trust yourself. Just because someone's been a medic longer doesn't mean that they're a better medic, right? That's not what makes us a good or bad medic. Our assessments are what makes us good or bad medics. Patients' rights. Patients have a few too many rights in the United States, as far as I'm concerned. Big problems here are that if they just say they want to go to a hospital, we are legally required to take them to a hospital. Well, in most situations. All right. Access to emergency care, blah, blah, blah. All right, moving through this. I want to get to some interesting information. There's also a big issue about inebriation, right? Someone has a beer and they don't want to go to the hospital. They are technically intoxicated, but they're not altered. Like they can refuse. Now they have had 2 beers. Can they refuse? And by the way, it's always 2 beers. You ever notice that? I had 2 beers, 2 drinks. Now let's say they are completely schnockered. Now, obviously, that's a little easier. But yeah, first and last drink, those are the 2. But this can be difficult sometimes, figuring out where those distinctions lie. That's a big one that we face here in San Diego frequently. How inebriated are they? They're always a little inebriated, but how inebriated? All right. Blah, blah, blah. The patients have a lot of rights. The customer is always right, which is kind of the case in EMS, even though realistically our customers are almost exclusively wrong. All right. The public health sector is basically what we try to work with in order to reduce call volume, right? We try to do public health campaigns, the same way that the fire department works. The fire department, you think of it this way, they're essentially a business that wants to put itself out of business, right? They promote sprinkler systems, flame retardant clothing and building materials. They do lots of talks with kids and adults on fire safety. They do fire inspections. All of these things have caused fewer and fewer and fewer fires. And firefighters are not so happy about this because firefighters love doing one thing, which is putting out fires. It's a lot of fun. Unfortunately, there's not as many fires as there used to be. Well, in most areas. Building codes have had a big part of that too. Yeah, so they're trying to put themselves out of business, if you really want to think of it that way. Ideally, the EMS system would work the same way. Unfortunately, because of privatization, it actually pays to increase transports, not decrease them. All right. The public health sector is a unique field in that it partners with many health professions to ensure a healthy population, more or less. We try to give people lots of information about this, like, for example, stay-at-home orders and vaccinations and fluoride in the drinking water. People don't like it when the government tries to control them, even when the government has their best interests in mind. There's always going to be people that detract from it and fight against it and compromise the entire system, especially with vaccinations, unfortunately.